What if you didn't just hope your passive income portfolio could survive a market crash, but you actually knew in advance it was engineered to take on the meanest bear markets? Today, I'm introducing my PIIverse LEPB model, the Living Expenses Protection Buffer, a powerful modeling tool that helps you build an income portfolio designed to protect your lifestyle when markets drop 10, 20, even 30%. This model lets you run real what-if scenarios by adjusting your expenses, your other income sources, and even the structure of your income portfolio strategy, so that you can see exactly how resilient your plan is under various scenarios. And then I'll take you inside my PIIverse LEPB modeling spreadsheet, which I created, where you'll learn how to align your portfolio with your lifestyle, your goals, and your long-term sustainability. No more guesswork, no more hoping, just more clarity about your passive income strategy. So, let's dig into this powerful income strategy modeling tool I call the LEPB. Hello everybody, my name's Perry and welcome to the PIIverse. And this is going to be, I think, one of my rare crown jewel videos that I think many of my viewers are going to be watching a few times. I really put a lot of work into this video. It's taken almost 5 days of work between the video itself and a very complex spreadsheet that I'll be talking about in this video, which I think people are going to get excited about, and my pillar members are going to be able to get downloaded copies of if they find this interesting to them. So again, what we're going to do, it's called the LEPB, the Living Expense Protection Buffer. This is a strategy that I've been using actually internally in my strategy for basically since I started building my passive income portfolio strategy. But I gave it a corny name, and I finally decided, you know what, it needs to be more powerful, more intuitive, more flexible, so every one of my investor viewers can actually understand it better and have it actually work more flexible towards their needs, not just mine. And we will get into all of those details of what I'm talking about in the introduction and everything we're going to work with. This is basically a critical strategy for passive income investors, and I think you need to stick around to watch this. So let's get going, because there's lots to talk about, and stick around and grab a coffee, because this is going to be another course from Perry's PIIverse on passive income investing strategies. So what I want to do, first of all, is go through the agenda of what we're going to be talking about. So the first thing we're going to do is going to do a video disclaimer. I have to make sure people are aware of the situation watching my videos. Secondly, we're going to do an introduction of the PIIverse LEPB, the Living Expense Protection Buffer. Actually, hard to roll off my tongue, the Living Expense Protection Buffer. Then we're going to say, what is it? So we're going to dive deep on what it is. Followed by that, we're going to talk about monthly living expenses and why this matters so much, not only in this strategy, in this model that I've created, but everyone should know this no matter who you are, no matter what kind of investment or what kind of financial situation you're in. Everyone should know this one. So we're going to go through it. It might help beyond the topic of the LEPB. And then we're going to talk about the cash inflows, the details that the LEPB model uses as part of its cash inflows in calculating the results. We're going to then talk about how my specific PIIverse LEPB modeling tool works. I created a very complex spreadsheet that I refer to as my LEPB modeling tool. So I'm going to give you a general summary of how it works. And then the more exciting part about it, I'm going to give you an actual detailed demonstration of the PIIverse LEPB modeling tool spreadsheet. I'm going to go through several different scenarios so I can show you how, depending on your situation, how the numbers for the buffering model is different for every different person. So this is why it's going to be really interesting and eye-opening for all passive income investors to watch this. Finally, we're going to finish with some conclusions. All right, so let's start with a disclaimer. A notice to all viewers: I am not a licensed nor trained financial, investment, or tax expert. I'm just a retail investor with a passion for investing, sharing my personal knowledge and experiences of my own investing journey, be it right or wrong. Viewers must not take any content, thoughts, or opinions in this video as financial advice. Please do your own research and consider professional advice before investing. This content is for fun and entertainment only and not providing any advice. So let's talk about the introduction. So, introduction to the PIIverse LEPB. So let's go through a background. Since my PIIverse passive income strategy was released back in July 2025, when I put out that video that explained my entire strategy, you will see a link of it pinned in the top of the comments for anyone that doesn't know what my main playbook looks like. You can actually go and download it and or watch it. But anyways, since then, I have always constantly mentioned a critical component of my PIIverse strategy, and that is, I referred to it always as my 3x expenses monthly income target. So what I meant by that is I actually explained it as it was 3 times the expenses, my expenses. So as I explained, the 3x expensive strategy was to ensure that even in the worst bear markets, my portfolio still produced more monthly generated income than my average monthly living expenses. So I quickly, early in those days, because I didn't think I was doing this for a broad spectrum of audience, I did it just for me. I turned around and said, okay, Perry, if you need about $10,000 a month to enjoy your retirement, then I want to make sure that my portfolio has a buffer of 3 times my expenses. So basically I said my portfolio better generate $30,000 in the good years, because if there's a bear market and the markets drop 10, 20, even 30%, I want to make sure that there's enough generated income during the good years that when the bad markets come and my monthly distributions drop by 20, 30, 40%, I still can pay all my retirement, my lifestyle, my living expenses. So I quickly just instantly called it my 3x expenses. Now, that is specific to me. And then I realized, you know what? This is not helpful for anybody else. So unfortunately, the 3x monthly expenses term was extremely specific only to my own investing goals. And of course, like I said, way back when I was only worried about myself, I didn't worry about anybody else. But now that I actually have a YouTube channel that is actually trying to explain strategy to new investors or investors that are trying to mature their own strategy, this didn't make any sense. It was not any help for anybody or any investors that were following me to understand how to determine what their ratio should be, because 3x expenses is not a universal formula. It's not something that everyone should use 3x expenses. Some may use 5 times, some may use 1.5 times. But the big problem is how do you determine it? And this is the thing that is where the real complexity comes true. When I actually built this spreadsheet, I was amazed how many metrics were needed in order to come up with a modeling tool so that people can say, how do I come up with a buffering model that basically meets my own needs or somebody's own needs? So, in fact, I have not even given it a more intuitive strategy term that properly describes the term. So I called it 3x monthly expenses, but again, it means nothing. So until this video, I didn't have it a name. I didn't give it an actual strategy name or a concept name. And I want to explain here, there are many ways to describe this strategy. So the way I'm describing it, there's several others, and I even know a couple others that actually, it was funny. There was I think it was called the Income Architect, came up with a term that was using a term that was actually a good option that I said, man, I should have used something like that too. But for example, you could have called this strategy the market downturn income protection. You could have called it the lifestyle expenses assurance buffer. You could have called it the income protection buffer. You could have called it several things. I decided I wanted to give it a term that actually was a little bit more accurate with regards to what it was doing. So after a lot of thinking and talking to my AI buddy and saying, hey, what are different options? I came up to the conclusion that I wanted to call it the living expenses protection buffer, because what it is exactly that. It's a buffer of generated income that can protect your living expenses. It makes sure that you will always have enough money to pay for your critical expenses. So that's why I referred to this one as the LEPB, Living Expenses Protection Buffer. Now, very interesting as part of this introduction is the LEPB is exclusive for income portfolios. It competes with what the growth portfolio investors use, which is called a cash wedge. It works completely different than a cash wedge. And so thereby, that's why I said this is now. Growth portfolio users cannot use the LEPB. This is a very powerful modeling tool and concept, and it can't be used by growth portfolios because they do not produce any monthly income. And a key element of the LEPB is to leverage the monthly cash flow that income portfolios generate, something a growth portfolio cannot do. It only can generate income by basically selling its assets. So therefore, could a growth portfolio maybe use the parts of the model and come up with a different way of doing it? Maybe, but their way of doing it is what's very universally referred to as a cash wedge. They basically put an emergency fund in a very liquid, market insulated portfolio or account, like a money market fund or a bank account or a GIC, whatever. And they basically, during very bad markets, they basically draw off of it so that they don't have to sell their shares during very bad markets. In an income portfolio, that's not a factor for us. We are generating income on good market days and bad market days. So we are allowed to come up with a much more effective strategy, and the LEPB is that strategy. All right, so this video is going to explain what the LEPB model is, and it's going to demonstrate my PIIverse LEPB model spreadsheet created for my Pillar members. So if you're a Pillar member, when I'm finished this video, if you want this spreadsheet and you are a Pillar member, you will be able to download a copy of this spreadsheet, and we'll talk about that again later on. Okay, so what is LEPB? Again, Living Expense Protection Buffer. What is it? The LEPB is a cash flow buffering model defined within the passive income strategy that you've built for your portfolio. And it ensures a passive income portfolio can pay the investor's critical monthly living expenses even during bear market downturns. That is its purpose in life. It's a modeling tool to make sure that you always have enough cash coming out of your portfolio to pay your critical monthly bills. And make sure you can do it no matter if the markets are good or bad. Developing an LEPB strategy forces the PI investor, the passive income investor, I'm going to say PII or PI investor, to think through all important elements that make up their monthly cash flow and ensure that a portfolio strategy remains sustainable and meets the investor's goals of generating income to pay for their FIRE or retire phase of their life. So, the LEPB model uses 4 primary components as part of its computations. The first one is living expenses, monthly living expenses, and we're going to get in details of what that means. The second component are the non-investment inflows. The third one is the investment income, and the fourth one is the cash reserve. The resulting LEPB model helps an investor to get answers to several important lifestyle, budgeting, and investing questions, such as you will be able to answer questions like, do I have enough cash inflows to sustain my lifestyle and its respective living expenses that are required for that lifestyle? If not, What are my options to make it sustainable? Do I have to restrict my lifestyle? Do I have to increase my wealth of my portfolio? Do I have to find new forms of inflows like a job or some other kind of inflow? So what the modeling tool is going to force you to get answers to is it's by going through the model, you're going to realize, wow, I'm not ready yet. I don't have enough cash for this kind of lifestyle. What am I going to do? So it's going to help you come up with different ideas on options on how you could deal with lifestyle changes if you don't have the cash flow to meet your lifestyle based on your initial understanding of a lifestyle. Another one I put as an option is wait longer. So also, how should my income portfolio be structured to long-term sustain my lifestyle? This modeling tool will help you get a better, stronger understanding of how to structure your portfolio. Maybe it's not aggressive enough. Maybe it's too aggressive. So maybe you need to put more anchors and less juicers in. So this tool is going to give you the high-level perspective that you could basically say, okay, you know what? I thought I had to be more aggressive. Maybe I don't have to be as aggressive. So with a tool like this, you're going to be able to model out different scenarios such as, you know what? I thought I needed a 25% yield in my portfolio, but if I can get away with a 15% yield and be more stable, I'm going to do it. This modeling tool will help you come up with those kind of options. And then finally, what should my portfolio income buffer ratio be? For example, Perry picked three times expenses. But what should it be for you as your investor so that even against the worst bear markets, it will allow you to sleep at night? So that is what these kind of questions will be answered by using this LEPB model. So let's walk through the LEPB model. Okay, we are going to start with what is the most crucial of all the components, and that is your monthly living expenses. And why this matters. This matters more than anything. Knowing your complete monthly living expenses is absolutely critical for the LEPB strategy to work, as these expenses are what the inflows must consistently pay on a monthly basis, regardless of the market conditions. So inside your, what makes up? So total monthly living expenses within the LEPB model are actually made up of two primary components. So let's talk what those two components are. The first one is what's referred to as the average living expenses. So what are average living expenses? So these are expenses that are expected and reoccur every 1 to 3 months or even 6 months. I gave a number of 1 to 3 months, but if it's something that you know is coming up, like let's say your water bill that comes every 3 months, or your monthly rent. So monthly rent's easy. We're doing everything based on a monthly basis, and I should have actually put it in this video, but we're using the atomic center point of a monthly expense. So if, for example, you have a water bill that pays every 3 months, you take that water bill, divide it by 3, and you'll say that is my monthly, is that 1/3 of that quarterly payment. If you pay insurance every year, you take that, divide it by 12, and just say that that's part of your monthly bill. So the point would be is you know that it's coming, you know you have to pay it, you're expecting it, and you basically want to add that to what's called your average living expenses. This is a blend of both mandatory and discretionary monthly expenses. Investors should, when they're actually sitting down at the coffee table with you and your spouse, you should be sitting down with a notepad and writing down all your expected reoccurring monthly expenses. But what I would recommend, very importantly, since you're already going through the process, categorize each expense as a mandatory expense or a discretionary expense. For example, paying the rent is mandatory. Going to a restaurant is discretionary. So if you have that and you say, hey, we go to restaurants twice a week and we spend maybe $300 on restaurants every month, that's an expected reoccurring thing. You do it often, you do it every month, on average, it might go up and down, but give it an average number. But then you would categorize that as a discretionary, because it's something that if you had to, you could eliminate it or reduce it. But do it at the time you're categorizing, you're listing all these expenses. So examples would be things like housing, utilities, food, insurance, transportation, health, entertainment, miscellaneous, like going shopping to buy clothes or whatever you want. It's anything that you know that you do on a relatively regular basis. Again, even if it's monthly or every 3 months or every 2 months, come up with an average for every one of them. If you know that you're doing it generally sometime every part of the year, then come up and give you a number for that monthly number. These costs may vary. So produce an average monthly living expense dollar over, let's say, a 6-month period. Or if you want, make it a 12-month period. I'm saying 6-month period, but come up with an average and say this is what that number is on a monthly basis. The LEPB must address paying these average monthly expenses each month. So this is part of the model to say, okay, so the LEPB model says, I know I have to pay these on a monthly basis. These expenses are going to be the mandatory expenses that I have to make sure that my portfolio can actually pay every month. The next one is what's referred to as extraordinary expenses. So what are extraordinary expenses? These are expenses that are not regularly scheduled to occur. They're very uncommon, or they may be very rarely happening. So they could either be unexpected, such as your hot water tank broke and you had to pay $500 for a hot water tank that you didn't expect to break. So that's an extraordinary expense. Or it was planned. You wanted to buy a car, and the nice thing about a planned or extraordinary expense is that you could actually budget and start building up for it. So a planned extraordinary expense is something that you don't do often, like buy a car, and you say, okay, so we're going to have that extraordinary expense, and we're going to have to figure out how the LEPB model is going to pay for that. The LEPB addresses how to accommodate these extraordinary expenses over the average living expenses. So the model is going to say, I have to address both expenses, but the first one is going to be the average living expenses. How am I going to pay for that one? And then what is my solution for paying for the extraordinary expenses? And the model will talk about that. So the big thing before we go to the next page is, until you know your living expenses, the LEPB model cannot be developed. So you could watch this video, you can see what the whole model is about, but honestly, you can't even start tackling using this modeling tool until you've taken the time to go through this. And I'm not saying this only for the LEPB model. If anybody has not actually sat down, just average living as basically running a family a budgeting cycle, everyone should do this regardless, is to sit down, figure out what their monthly expenses are, because this is something people should know, and it shouldn't need an LEPB model to do it. This is something you should know. The LEPB model is actually forcing you to do it, because if you don't do the LEPB model, if you don't do the articulate calculation of what an average living expenses is for you to live from month to month, this model will not work, because it needs accurate data, and you can't do this model without accurate data. So do it regardless. All right, now we're going to talk about the cash inflows. The LEPB model requires a full listing of all sources of cash inflows, not just your investment portfolio, because as we live, we all have money coming in from different sources, some a lot more than others, but we need to know what they all are. These inflows are critical to develop a budget that balances the living expenses against how they will be paid, or even reduced or deferred if you do not have enough inflows. So if you don't have enough cash inflows to pay for your living expenses, then this is important to know, because you're saying, well, geez, I'm basically living on borrowed time, because if I don't have the money to pay for the living expenses, something's got to give. Ultimately, you either have to reduce your living expenses or go further and further in debt. But who wants to be in debt? So you don't want to do that. So you want to definitely know what your cash inflows are. The LEPB model uses two primary sources of cash inflow. and I call them income sources. So the first one is the non-investment inflows. These are regular sources of income other than what the investment portfolio generates for you. Examples would be like employment income, pensions, government payments, annuities, royalties, other sources of income, anything, annual dividend check, or money coming in from a parent or a family member. It doesn't matter what it is. If it is a source of income that is available to you and comes at a regular basis, once a month, once a year, once every 6 months, that needs to be listed here because it will make up what is needed to do the budget. Where an inflow source is not as frequent or varies, determine an average monthly number. So for example, if you have something like you're basically paid employment by commission, and sometimes you get paid $1,000 a month, and then sometimes your employment commission is $2,000 a month, come up with an average. Similar to what we did with expenses, come up with an average. For the LEPB model, these cash inflows will be used against the average monthly expenses. So these are the ones that we're going to be using first before we go to the next source. The next one is investment income. This is the monthly income generated by all income investment portfolios. The LEPB model uses this income to pay all the remaining living expenses that were not paid by the non-investment inflows. So we'll talk about that later, but if you have $5,000 a month and your non-investment inflows basically generate $2,000, this guy, the investment income, is going to focus on the remaining $3,000 and say that is what I'm focusing on. The LEPB model must also ensure that the investment portfolio can pay even during the worst bear markets. So if it's say 5,000 and non-investments is 2,000 and you're remaining at 3,000, it's got to make sure that the portfolio can generate at least $3,000 a month, no matter how bad the bear markets are or how good the markets are. So that's the important thing. It's there to finally make sure that the final payments or the final expenses are paid off for the month, and it does it in a healthy manner. The final element is actually not an income flow or an inflow. It's referred to as the cash reserve. So what is the cash reserve? It is not an inflow, but rather it's a reserve of liquid cash. For example, the cash in your bank account, or something like a GIC, or something that basically is available to you. I wouldn't even say a GIC. It has to be very liquid. Generally, I'm going to say a bank account, and it's maintained by the excess from the other inflows. So basically, if the bank account is basically at $10,000 and let's say you really like it at $15,000, it's going to be your inflows that are going to actually make sure that it stays at a healthy ratio or a healthy number, a number that you like, that makes you sleep at night, knowing that that cash is available for emergencies, right? You don't want to have no cash reserve, because if you're only living from paycheck to paycheck, is what they refer to it as, and you all of a sudden have to pay for a $800 hot water tank, if without a cash reserve, how are you going to pay that bill? So that is the purpose of the cash reserve. It is not an inflow. It is basically an aggregation of inflow of money coming from the other inflows to keep it at a level that's comfortable for you. The cash reserve is primarily used to pay extraordinary expenses. So where the other two are really paying mostly for your regular monthly expenses, not that they have to, they could pay for extraordinary as well. We are going to use in the model, the LEPB model, the cash reserve is there to protect you against extraordinary expenses. Okay, so again, this is just my guidelines. Anybody could do it any way they want, but for the LEPB model, that's sort of how we're doing it. All right, so how does the PIIverse LEPB model work? The LEPB model incorporates these 4 expenses and inflow elements with other critical metrics to develop a relatively accurate LEPB model that shows the sustainability of a lifestyle under various scenarios. The PIIverse LEPB model is a custom spreadsheet that I created that that uses both the entered and calculated metrics to allow investors to play out several what-if scenarios and see what the LEPB results are from those what-if scenarios. From this, an investor could lock into a specific LEPB model and then the resulting passive income strategy that meets their unique personal investing goals. So this is actually a tool that can actually feed into you developing a more articulate, more accurate strategy or income portfolio strategy, because it'll say, you know what, you're being too aggressive. You said you wanted a 35% yield. I'm showing you through this modeling tool that you can actually meet your goals at 15%. So this is actually a tool that helps guide your portfolio strategy to say, hey, maybe I'm too aggressive. If I only need like a 15% yield, then why have I got so many juicers and boosters? I'm going to really come down to having a lot more anchors. So that is what the value of this tool is. It actually helps you articulate and lock down your PI strategy. All right. Following are some of the entered metrics that the LEPB modeling spreadsheet uses. So I'm not going to go through all of them because we're going to go through it in the spreadsheet, but I just wanted to show you a list of those metrics that you are going to actually have to enter. And we're going to go through all of these later, but in this page, you can see what they all are. There's a whole bunch of them. And again, the video is going to very shortly show you each one, and we're going to talk about them. One of the more important LEPB model results is the LEPB buffer ratio. This ratio helps an investor set how much monthly generated income their passive income portfolio should generate during good markets, so that even when bear markets occur, the portfolio can still generate enough monthly income to pay all the living expenses. So this is why I talk about that buffer ratio. If your expenses are known and your expenses are, say, $10,000, and you say, I can sleep at night knowing that my portfolio is generating on a monthly basis $30,000, and you say that way I know that, based on the model, that even when the markets go down 20, 30%, I'm still having the ability to pay my bills. That is what the buffer's job is to tell you what is a good buffer number for you to understand. It's not going to set it. It's going to basically say what is your number versus what number you like. If it's below that number, you're going to say, wow, it's below the number I like. Or it's going to say, no, based on your metrics, you're way above it. You're more than good enough. So that is an important one, and we're going to talk about it in the spreadsheet. Okay, enough theory. Let me take you to the PIIverse LEPB modeling spreadsheet. It's taken me about 4 days to build this and fine tune it. After I go through this, before I actually release it into the PIIverse Google Drive for my Pillar members to download, I'm going to see if there's any final touches I have to do, cleanups, make sure it's friendly enough before I actually make it available for download. So I'm going to go through this video. This video is going to help me find maybe any final glitches. I've gone through it several times, but this took about 4 days to actually build this thing, and I hope you guys enjoy this. So let's get to it. Okay, everybody. So here is my passive income LEPB modeling calculator. Welcome to my spreadsheet. This is a custom spreadsheet that I have been actually working on for about 5 days. Started off simple, but I wanted to develop a modeling tool called the LEPB modeling tool that would actually be very valuable to my Pillar members that actually want access to my spreadsheets that I do for calculations. This is actually going to be in my Google Drive for Pillar members to download. And I think this is going to be a very valuable tool because this is one that can actually be used actively all the time if you're wanting to make changes to your portfolio strategy and you want to test out different scenarios, like maybe changing your aggressiveness of your yield, maybe say from 30% to 20%, and do what ifs and how much should I actually reinvest. This is the tool that will actually do a lot of that and answer a lot of those questions. Okay, that was my intro. Now I'm going to give you guys, because again, I know most of you people already know this, but in order to cover my rear end and make sure those people that don't know this know this, right at the very top of my spreadsheet here, it is actually showing you my disclaimer. I just want to make sure you guys can see this. There's my little mousey. My disclaimer, my notice, my warning. The content and calculations in this spreadsheet have not been independently verified to be accurate, and they can contain errors. And spreadsheets generally, or even it takes sometimes several iterations before a spreadsheet actually becomes to the point that you believe that it's of, let's say, extremely high confidence. The more complex the spreadsheet is, the more iterations it takes before a spreadsheet becomes pretty much rock solid. This one's a relatively early spreadsheet, so it wouldn't shock me that after I film this video and people that are watching this video are going to look at this, I'll already have found maybe a little glitch that I need to fix here or an enhancement that I need to do here. I've actually did it once before. This is a second generation of this portion of this video because there were several things I needed to fix on the first version. So yes, spreadsheets can and often do contain errors. And so the results may be skewed. They may not be accurate. So I'm giving everybody a heads up. This is not verified to be accurate by an independent source. It can contain errors. The author, i.e. me, takes no responsibility for its accuracy. If you are using this spreadsheet or even looking at it here in the video, use this spreadsheet as a reference for your own modeling work. This is for fun and entertainment only. I'm doing this second warning here because spreadsheets are something you really got to know what you're getting into or what you're looking at when you're looking at results. Do not make investment decisions based on the results from this spreadsheet, and do your own research and consider professional advice before investing. So that is my second warning on this. All right, so now we're going to talk about what this spreadsheet is. I want to first do a quick walkabout. Then we're going to go and do a couple scenarios so that you guys can see how this actually works. So this spreadsheet is actually broken up into three pieces. The first piece is called the critical inputs section. So this is the part where you're going to be doing all the data entry, all the changes in your modeling. Anything that's listed in purple are fields that you have to enter data in. If it is not a purple field, then basically it's actually a calculated field. It's actually telling you something. It's actually giving another metric that's basically a result of the metric you put in. But this is basically where all your inputs go in, so that the second section, right over here, is the results from doing all the work on the first section. So when we finish, don't look at anything here because we haven't even touched the table yet. So this is basically the section that basically shows a 3-year trending average. So what it shows is, because I'm not going to go 30 years, but you could generally get a trend on where things are going after 3 years. Is it generally going up slowly? Is it going down slowly? Is it going up really quick? So I did it over 3 years. Doing it 30 years, it's just basically you extend it further and further and further. And if anybody of my pillar members downloads this spreadsheets and wants to do all 30 years, more power to you. You can just basically push down this third section and keep adding more years. But this is the section we will talk about after we go through the first section. And we will talk about what all these mean. And then the third section is the actual graphical illustration that actually shows how the LEPB buffer ratio looks like compared to your expenses that you have to pay every month, and what it looks like in a good year and what it looks like during a very bad bear market year. And then it also will show what the actual target trend is for what I refer to as the LEPB buffer ratio. Okay, the LEPB ratio. All right, so those are the three sections we're going to talk about. So before we look at the second two, we're going to go from top to bottom on an arbitrary scenario. I'm just going to come it out of my head and just pretend I'm average Joe investor. And I said, okay, I'm going to use Perry's spreadsheet and let's see what things look like. And then I'm going to actually use my own portfolio and plug in the numbers very close to what my portfolio is as we speak. And then we're going to show you cool ways of using this to, throughout this part of the video, I'm going to show you how this modeling tool, and why it's actually called a modeling tool is because a modeling tool, basically, once you plug in the numbers and you can see the results, you can model different scenarios. Like, what if I wanted to lower my yield? What if I wanted to increase my reinvestment? So that is what modeling is all about. And by doing this modeling, you can then come out to basically what you say is, okay, you know what? Based on all the modeling, this is the scenario I actually like. And then basically you use that scenario and you plug it into your passive income strategy and actually make your strategy work towards the modeling results. Okay, so let's start. So I'm going to turn around, and we did talk already in this video about how to create cash flow, what are your different expenses, and a whole bunch of stuff. So what we're going to start with is the first section, which is when we talked about the living expenses. We're going to now talk about the living expenses and some of the initial key metrics needed for this modeling tool. So we're going to turn around and say that, you know what? Joe investor here, he's done it. Him and his wife has sat down at the table. They looked at all their expenses and they said, you know what? We believe that we can basically get by comfortably and not have any problems living our retirement or our FIRE lifestyle if we basically run with about an expenditure of $5,000 a month. Everything, by the way, I should say here, and it already says here in very big letters, everything here, unless it says otherwise, is based on a monthly figure. So we are working with monthly figures. So what we're saying here is Joe and Mary say that they basically would like to basically have a portfolio or their income sources cover $5,000 a month. Now, maybe they turned around and said it was only $4,500 a month. It's always good to add a little bit more buffer. Remember, we are talking about averages, but it's good if you actually make that number a little bit higher than you want, as we talked about in the video. So let's say they said it was $4,500, but to play it safe, they would like their portfolio and their other income sources to cover $5,000. They also turned around and said that based on their lifestyle and based on their level of comfort, they want to make sure that their cash balance or their cash reserve is at any given time approximately running around 2 times their expenditures. Now, let's turn around and say it's different just so that I can show that we're entering it differently. So maybe they'll say 2.5 times. So if they say that on a monthly basis they expend $5,000, this is saying that I want to have a cash balance that's around $12,500 because it's 2.5 times the expenses. This is called the LEPB buffer. This is the actual ratio. So what you're saying here in this number is how many times over your expenses, over your net expenses, should the portfolio be able to generate income. So this is the generate income over net expenses. And we're talking about net expenses, not this number, because we're going to get to another section that talks about all other income sources. So whatever your passive income portfolio requires to pay, so let's say of the 5,000, we could be 3,000. Basically, you're saying that I'm going to say here, you know what, we're a little bit small here. I want to make sure we're safe. I would like to have a minimum target buffer ratio of 3. What this means is if the net expenses are, say, 3,000, then basically my portfolio must at minimum generate 3 times more than 3,000. So it needs to generate $9,000 at minimum in order for you to feel comfortable. This number can change depending on maybe change of lifestyle, or maybe you've done some major investments. And the larger your portfolio gets, generally the smaller that this number gets, because you're generally doing 3 times 3,000 versus 3 times 30,000. That's a big difference. So chances are your LEPB buffer ratio, this is the buffer ratio here, could drop as your income gets larger, as your portfolio gets larger and generates more. All right, this one is a calculated number based on this one. So what we're saying here in this metric is we're basically saying, Okay, after my portfolio pays its responsibilities of whatever the monthly expenses are that it must pay off, and you have excess passive income from your monthly distributions, how much of what's left over do you want to reinvest back into your portfolio? Right here, I say 50%. Now, keep in mind, and we're going to talk about this again, whatever you say that is not reinvested. So if it's 50, this means this is 50. If I say this is 70, then this one will be 30. So what it says is, of the leftover cash each month, how much of the leftover cash in your portfolio that was generated for that month is going to be reinvested. What's not reinvested is then withdrawn from the portfolio, because what you're then saying is that I would like to take this excess cash out and I want to put it into my cash reserves. So basically, I want my bank account to get bigger. So let's, for example, say that you had a cash reserve of $12,500 and you had a major expense. Remember, we talked about major extraordinary expenses. You guys went to Mexico and you spent $7,000. Now your $12,500 cash balance is down significantly. So what you're going to use is you're going to use the excess cash that's not reinvested, pulled out of your portfolio, and it's put back into the bank account. So this gets refilled from what's left over and not reinvested. You could decide what that number is. I'm giving it an arbitrary number of 70%. But of course, on a day-to-day or on a month-to-month basis, you could turn around and say for October, it's going to be 90. And then maybe for November, we're going to only go down to 60. These numbers change from month to month, but on an average, we're going to set this on an average. So on an average basis, how much money that's excess after paying all the bills gets reinvested versus how much is actually pulled out of the portfolio. Now, keep in mind, when you pull money out of the portfolio, you're reducing the book NAV of the portfolio because you're actually withdrawing or melting down your portfolio to take that cash out. So your NAV goes up when distributions are paid, but when you take some of that distributions that were paid and take it out, it actually is going to lower your book NAV because your NAV is basically dropped. Your book and your current NAV is going to be dropped. Sorry, your current NAV is going to drop because you basically took cash out that you could have reinvested and brought it up. So this is what it is. And of course, the other thing is if you're in a sheltered account, if you're taking that money out, you're going to be taxed on the money that you're actually removed from that sheltered account. Okay? Excuse me, I needed a drink. All right, so let's go on. So we're going to say this number right now is 80%. So I'm saying here that Mary and John are going to put 80% of what's left over back into the portfolio. 20% of it they're going to take out and put it into their bank account so that they can use it for living expenses. Okay, the last one here is your annual inflation rate in this section. Generally, and I know RBC used this number, but you could use whatever number you want. This is basically what should the annual inflation rate be, because my modeling tool basically includes inflation because, of course, as we move forward in time, costs go up, inflation goes up, and therefore our portfolio, our expenses, everything else should be calculated based on an inflation rate. So we're using an inflation rate of 3.7%. But if you believe it's not really that bad this year, you could turn around and make it 3%, but this number can be changed any way you want. Okay, so now Mary and John are in the second section, which is, remember from the earlier in the video, we talked about the non-investment monthly inflows. So these are the inflows that are not part of your portfolio. So I put the major ones in here and then I have an other. So let's say Mary and John, say Mary still has a part-time job and she's bringing some money still in. So let's add that. And it's not much. It's just a very small part-time job. And let's say on a monthly basis, that basically is $1,500 a month. Okay, this is gross before taxes because I actually have taxes actually included in this thing as well. So you would turn around and say, Mary generates about $1,500 before taxes on her employment, maybe working at Walmart or whatever she's doing. Okay. Then you do your pension. If you have a pension, so say John has he's retired, he's retiring, and he knows that he's going to have a pension. It's not going to be a big one, but let's say he basically is going to get a pension of $1,000 a month. All right. Again, before taxes. So put in everything in before taxes because we're going to tax it later. John and Mary are both the same age, and they both, let's say, are over 60, and they both decide that they're going to take their CPP right away. So let's make that another $1,800. Let's make it $1,700 just to make sure the size isn't enough. So this is $1,700 a month that they're getting for pensions and that. If they had an annuity, you could add that in. If you have other reoccurring inflows, for example, maybe Mary was a singer and she gets royalties. So let's do something crazy and say she gets about $50 a month in singing royalties. So let's use that in here. All right. Once we've got that in, you could put whatever ones here you want. But if it's coming in and it's reoccurring, you should put this reoccurring inflow because it's got to be in here on what's your inflow cash. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is your estimated inflation indexing factor. So this is a factor. You could use it arbitrarily the way that you want. If Mary gets a small raise based on inflation, we know the government pension plan CPP does do it based on inflation. But let's say John's company pension is non-indexed like mine was that's why I dumped mine. So you may turn around and just come up with an arbitrary number saying, well, it would have been 3.7%, but I'm just going to say because the pension doesn't get indexed, let's just turn around and add that there's about a 2%, let's say about a 1.75% annual raise of the income, okay? And then the last one is come up with for all these sources of income, what is your tax rate for these inflows? So I'm going to turn around and say that, you know what, it's pretty good. They're only about 17% average tax, not nominal tax. What's the average tax? So we're going to say after they do their income tax and everything, they realize that their average tax is about 17%. So we use that number. All right, so what it's turning around in here is saying after taxes, generally Mary and John are bringing in $3,528. Their expenses for the month are $5,000. So now we have something to go by, but we're not going to finish that yet because we now got to go to the most important one because this whole spreadsheet is about investing. So now we're going to talk about the passive income section. So Mary and John now say, hey, they've decided to do some passive income investing. They believe in the PI model. Excuse me. Had to have a drink. So they now turn around and say, yeah, we built a portfolio and we got about $400,000. So they built up a portfolio of $400,000. And they did some great work, or they were actually doing some good thinking and gazinting. And they basically say that, hey, you know, Perry, our portfolio generally runs around 20. We've done some aggressive juicers. We did a couple juicers, maybe a couple boosters. Most of our stuff is anchors. We're running around a portfolio yield at target yield, meaning when the markets are good, and this is what you're getting when the markets are doing really good, we're trying to reach a target of around 25%. So that is what's called the yield of 25%, okay? Again, not when the markets are terrible. You want to know what is your target yield for your portfolio that you're striving for. And generally, when the markets are good, what's that number? So for this model, we're going to say 25%. Now, my spreadsheet has basically come up with an algorithm that says, okay, hold on. We know that portfolios, passive income portfolios that use ETFs that get more and more aggressive start showing signs of erosion and let's say aggressive lag and some erosion. So what I've done with my model, and I used to use 0.5, but I've now moved it up to 0.75 just because I wanted to be more conservative in my calculations, and they seem to be a little bit more accurate. So what it does is if there's any yield greater than 20%, this modeling tool starts adding basically a NAV erosion factor on it, which the modeling tool will then take into account on how to calculate the current NAV. And it basically does that and puts it in place and then shows how the reinvesting fights that NAV. So if I would have said 20%, you could see the number is 0, and there would have been no NAV erosion factors built in. But as soon as I break 20%, and I'm going to use 25%, it's basically whatever the percentage is over 20% times 0.75. So in this case, it says if you basically are running a 25% yield, you're going to be hit with a 3.8% NAV erosion formula, a drag. Okay, so, and again, what we're going to do, it says, okay, based on 3.8% and based on your size of your NAV and your book. By the way, this is your book NAV. I should have said here, this is book NAV. Okay, so what it's going to say is, okay, based on that, Perry, Mary and John are going to have to make sure that when they reinvest, they're going to have to put at least $1,250 into reinvesting to counter that 3.8% NAV erosion factor into their portfolio in order to maintain a stability. The other thing that we're going to have to take into account is we did say that there's an inflation rate of 3.7%. So in order to have your portfolio fight inflation, it also calculates it. It says based on your spreadsheet, based on your current book NAV, we're going to basically say that you need to have another $1,233 put aside into your minimum reinvesting to cover inflation each month. So basically it comes up and it says, okay, based on that calculation, on a given month, on average, you should be reinvesting about $2,483 a month of your portfolio should go back into the portfolio at minimum. It doesn't mean how much you're going to actually do, but it's suggesting this is the minimum you should do in order for your portfolio to fight inflation and to fight any NAV erosion. Okay. The next one is the bear market indicator. Now, this is where you could play a lot of what if scenarios. So we're turning around saying, you know what, Mary and John want to make sure that when some big bears come, let's say they believe honestly that in 2025 we could have a bear market where the S&P could drop as low as 25% off of its high. So we're going to say 25%. So this number will be used to show the scenario of your portfolio both in its good years and its bear market years. So we're going to say that the S&P drops 25%. Based on that, it comes out and says, okay, based on everything I know above, with a 25% target yield, your calculated bear market yield will be down to about 18%. So you can assume that distributions that used to be at 25% during your peak will now during bear markets only be generating a yield of 18%. All right, and that's been calculated from this 25% drop in the bear market. This number here, by the way, changes and it gets more dramatic in its gap as the percentages go up. So when you could see, for example, if I were to put here 20%, you could see that from 20 to 15, it's 5%. So here, because it's 25%, you're now saying it's actually 7%. If I actually put 35%, closer to my yield, it's saying that target yield is 35, and I'm only during the bear markets going to be receiving 22%. So as the yield in your passive income gets more aggressive, it's actually drawing a lot more off and saying, hey, if you really are an aggressive portfolio, you're going to have to expect that your income is going to drop a lot more because it's a lot more volatile at 35% yield than it is at 20% yield. So that's what this thing is. And it takes this account into the NAV erosion factor. And that's how it sort of comes up with this number. So Mary and John said 25%. So we're sticking at 25. So they can see approximately a 7% drop in their yield during bear markets. This number here is a really complex one. And it has to be done. Mary and John would actually have to pull out old tax receipts, tax returns, and try to come up with a number, because I can't give you an accurate number here because this is the estimated average tax on the investment income that's being generated. This number is wild swinging. So, and I'm going to give you a scenario what I mean by wild swinging. If all of your portfolio, if Mary and John's entire portfolio is non-registered accounts, then basically everything that's generated will be taxed. Well, if Mary and John basically have a $400,000 portfolio with a 25% yield, that's generating quite a lot of money, over $100,000. So that means they might be taxed as much as, say, I don't know. And of course, they're going to split it between the two. So this is why this number could be all over the place. But if it's non-registered, all money generated as income in a non-registered is taxed. So this number could be as high as, say, Mary and John both divvy it up, and they could turn around and say that maybe it's going to be over 50. It could be, say, 32% or something like that. Who knows? If there wasn't a Mary and there was only a John, and John has to take the entire burden himself of, say, 125,000, this could go up to like 40%. So, it all depends on the tax situation. On the other side, and I want to point this out because this is a valued number that every person that downloads this spreadsheet is going to have to know. If, for example, like in my scenario, all my passive income is in my TFSAs and my RIFs and my TFSAs, so all my income generated is sheltered. So the only money that I actually get taxed on is the money that comes out of my RIFs. My TFSAs, the money that it comes out of to pay some bills, I don't even get taxed on that. So that means I know, for example, with mine, I'm just going to use my number when I calculated it out. When I went and looked at all my stuff for my current portfolio, it's only 8.2% is taxed because most of it is not actually taxed because most of it stays and gets reinvested. So this number here is good as long as you really understand how it works and make sure that this tax percentage is based on your tax situation, based on where you're putting your passive income, how much of it's in TFSAs, how much of it's in RIFs, how much is non-registered. This will determine this number. That's all I can say. What this says is if you turn around and say it's 40%, that means 40% of everything it sees. You have to sort of jiggery-pokery the values to say, well, okay, but for me, based on that, it's only 8.2. But let's say Mary and John keep it simple. They didn't put anything in TFSAs and they didn't put anything in RIFs. So they're $400,000. They're going to split it up. They're going to do worst case scenarios. So they're going to basically have, say, an average tax rate of, say, I don't know. They're dividing it in half. So let's say 24% each. So let's say they both get it down to 24%. All right. Now, what comes after that is it's going to give you a bunch of calculations. These are based on the 3-year average that comes from this chart on this side. We're going to talk about that later. But it looks at this and says, based on the average 3 years for the good years, the portfolio will generate $9,223 after taxes. Based on the tax ratio that I just gave you, it means you're going to have net $7,009 that you can basically use to pay some bills. You're also going to turn around and say that after you pay your minimum reinvestment value, which is basically reinvesting for NAV erosion and reinvesting for inflation, which is $2,400, you basically, it's saying here that you are left on average with $4,500. That's during good years. During bad years, it then turns around and says, okay, during a bear market, you said 25% bear market, we can sort of roughly anticipate that you're going to have about a $6,100 monthly income. You're basically going to see after taxes $4,682 of it. And after you pay your minimum reinvestment of $2,400, you're going to have $2,199 left. Okay? So now we go, and most of the rest of this stuff is now just calculated metrics that you can then use. So we're going to turn around and say, okay, so again, Mary and John said if they want $5,000, their net income from non-investments is $3,528. That means that the portfolio needs to pay $1,473 every month to pay off all of John and Mary's retirement bills. Okay, that's what that number means. Here are some additional metrics. And this is basically saying, what is now we're looking at the LEPB target ratio. So we said the target ratio was 3. based on that and based on the income and stuff, it basically says that your portfolio needs to generate at least $4,418 in order to reach your target, your LEPD target ratio. It's saying that you are already reaching that. You're at 7,009. That means you're $2,500 over the LEPD target. And you can see that's the case because here is the actual LEPB ratio that you're actually running right now. You're running at 3.9. In a bear market, which is not critical because the bear market is the whole purpose of the buffer is to make sure you have enough money during a bear market. But it actually here in this modeling tool even shows you what the buffer number is at bear market. So it says you're going to be red during a bear market. Again, not a big deal. This is the more important one, but it does tell you this number. It also tells you that based on your reinvestment strategy and your yield and everything combined, it's saying that you are generally declining in your LEPB buffer ratio. It means you're either not reinvesting enough or you're not generating enough income. So it is slowly declining, but it could be declining really slowly. We're going to look at that later. Other metrics it's capturing here is based on 3-year average. What is your portfolio withdrawals? When you withdraw out of the portfolio your expenses and your cash reserve. In other words, the stuff you didn't reinvest that gets pulled out of your portfolio. This is the stuff that if you were sheltered in sheltered RIFs, let's say all of your portfolio was in a RIF, then basically this is the $30,000 each month that you will be taxed on. So do 30,000 times basically, so this is on an annual basis, So this is how much you would be taxed on if you were fully in a RIF. It would say that you 30,700 would be what you're taxed on. Well, 30,000, especially if Mary and John are splitting it up, means only about $15,000 each. So this actually is a very small tax number if they're in a RIF. If they were basically not in a RIF and they were in a non-reg, as we've already talked about, we already said what that is, and that is basically the amount that is fully generated, and we know on average what that number is. So that is here, your portfolio generated before taxes if you were actually not putting anything in non-reg is 92,000. This is how much they would be taxed every year if they were basically not registered in non-reg accounts and non-sheltered accounts. The 3-year tax is basically based on the last number. It's just an average of based on what you're seeing right now. So that was based on the tax number you used here. And it says based on that, you were on average at the end of 3 years, you were basically paying $22,000. Now, if you use that number and you actually looked at your tax returns, you say, wow, we paid more than that. Then you could turn around and say, okay, we didn't get this right. Maybe we need to move this number up here to say 30%. And you can see the number goes up and says, yeah, okay, that's closer to what we actually paid. So this number here could be actually manipulated so that you can get this closer to real life. Okay, this number here is your excess after your expenses and your reinvestments have been paid out. Your real ones have been paid out on the target yield. In other words, during good years, you basically said you still had 2,386 left in the real numbers. And during bear markets, you only had $300 left. The last two numbers here on this section are telling you the metrics that says, what is your reinvestment percentages? So what this is saying here is that on a monthly basis, you're reinvesting after 3 years. So not based on the number up here, but based on 3 years, you're reinvesting $2,848 because you said that you wanted to put 80% back, right? That's here. So it says you're putting in $2,848. So for Mary and John, they are reinvesting 38% of all their money generated. So whatever they were generating on a monthly basis, the portfolio was generating, this is before tax, 38% of it was actually being reinvested back. So that's what this number means. Okay. Now, let's look at what Mary and John's chart looks like based on the numbers we gave it. We're going to move into this section. So I'm going to show you the 3 sections here. This section here is the part where it says what period, what year you are, Basically, what was your monthly expenses? So this comes right out of the input chart. So we said Mary and John started at $5,000. We said that Mary and John's other income can cover $3,478 of it. So in this modeling tool, the first thing that pays the bills is of the $5,000, your other income, like the employment income, your pension income, Mary's music career royalties, they will cover $3,478. That means that after inflows have paid their bills, everything in this column here is what your portfolio is responsible to pay for. Okay, so that's what makes this column very important. Now, just remember here, just want to show this to you. We said inflation is taken into account. So you can see that it was 5,000, then 15, then 31. So you can actually see inflation taking hold here. Okay, you can also see on an annual basis, I don't do this on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, remember we said that there's going to be an indexing. So everything like CPP and Mary's salary and stuff like that, at the beginning of every year, they get that raise. So whatever that number we said it was, I can't remember if it was 2% or 1.7, this goes here, then it goes up here, then it goes up here. So this is actually showing them getting their raise. Okay, now let's talk about this whole green section. This is all related to your passive income portfolio. I'm going to show you the two. If it's in blue, it's during the peak good years target yield. I call it target yield. This is the period where you're generally near the top of your portfolio. You're at or near your target yields. So this is target yield scenarios. This is during bear market yield. So it basically says, now let's put the bear market into effect and let's see the results of your portfolio during a bear market. And I'm going to show you here what this means. So the first section here is your portfolio NAV. You entered the book NAV based on lagging factors and everything else. It actually then calculates what the current NAV is based on the lag factors and stuff like that. So you can see here, it was 4,000. It's because there's a slight NAV erosion, we said. Let's go over here just so you can see some of those numbers. Because we said that there was a slight NAV erosion here, 3.8, you can see that the NAV is actually falling behind. And this is why it's called NAV lag. It's not eroding. It's not going down. It's still going up, but it's going up slower than the book NAV's going up. Okay, so. And now the question somebody asks is, well, why is the book NAV going up? Well, it's a simple answer. The book NAV's going up because we said we're reinvesting. And every time you reinvest, your book NAV is going to go up. The only time your book NAV goes down is if you actually sell assets and you basically are, liquidating and selling assets. But for our income portfolio, we buy and hold. So we're every month, whatever's not used to pay the bills goes back into the portfolio. That buying increases the book NAV. Okay. And then the current NAV is always calculated and starts lagging away from the book NAV. And it keeps getting further and further. It's called lag for a reason. And we gave it a lag number. We said what it was here, remember, 3.8%. So it basically is lagging away from the book NAV at a ratio of approximately 3.8% per year. Okay, that's what this is. So that is our book NAV and our current NAV. Of course, the scenario, everything I show you here for the target also is the case for a bear market. So we have 3 years worth of good years and we have 3 years worth of bad years. So you can actually show side by side what would be the scenario in this modeling tool if we had 3 good years, let's say 23, 24, 20, 25, whatever it is. And let's say, the next 3 years were really bad years. We hit, the markets go down, we're around 25% down, whatever. Again, it's always going to be fluctuating, but with a modeling tool, you're looking at best case, worst case, and then you average things out. So whatever's happening on here is happening here for the bear market. Okay, so we do this. You can see here's the book NAV and current NAV for here, and here's the book NAV and current NAV for there. Okay, the next thing we do is say, what is your distribution before taxes? This number here is your current yield based on the current NAV. So this would be your amount that you're generating based on the current NAV and the percentage we said, which was 25%. It then applies the taxes and it says, well, we can't pay our bills on before taxes. So the next thing it does is it says, give me what the distribution is after taxes. So it basically says you have $5,800 of actual net cash that you can pay bills with. All right. This one here is basically the LEPB buffers. This is your actual LEPB buffer, and this is the target LEPB value. So this is saying based on your target of, I think we said it was 3. Yep, we said it was 3. It basically takes this net amount here and multiplies it by 3. So this is what your portfolio must attain in order to maintain its LEPB buffer of 3. Well, nice news here is that the actual LEPB buffer ratio that you are currently running on is 3.8. And this number changes depending on how much you reinvest, depending on how much you withdraw from your portfolio, depending on what your yield is. All these numbers change. So you can see here currently for what we've done in this modeling scenario is that we're running at 3.8. So we're saying we're doing actually pretty good. 3.8. It does show that it is very slowly declining. After 3 years, it ended up at 3.5. That's not bad. And again, the nice thing is with your portfolio, you can readjust it and you can actually address it. But this is not something to be that worried about because you're still well above your target of 3.0 even after 3 years. Then what it does is says, what is the excess income after you paid your expenses? So this is this amount. It paid this amount. It now says, well, okay, John and Mary, you still have $4,293 left. Based on the minimum to reinvest value that you were given, it said, Mary and John, of that $4,200 at minimum, in order to maintain NAV stability and to pay for inflation, address inflation, you should at least put down $2,483. You said that you were willing to do 80% reinvestment of that. So you said of that $2,483, 80% of it right here is going to be reinvested. So you said, I want 80% of this. So that means of this amount, I'm going to actually reinvest $3,434. That means $859 that was remaining will be removed from the portfolio. It will be cashed out and withdrawn. So this is going to actually lower your NAV because this money was not used to reinvest. It was actually taken out of the portfolio. So we're basically going to take that away from the portfolio, but we're also going to add the $3,400 into the portfolio. So this new book NAV is basically taking into account that you added $3,434, but it also says that you're going to have withdrawing of $859. So this is the net of those two things because you're taking value out of the portfolio. And that's why these two come up with the new figure. And then we just continue doing this. So this basically the same scenario happens over and over and over, and it keeps averaging down. I give you a total annual, I give you totals for each year. So in this case, it basically shows you what the last one is. So it'll say at the end of year 1, it was this one. End of year 2 was this one. In this case, it basically shows you the same thing. It shows you what it was at the end. Then here it says what was the total for this year. So total yield before tax. Mary and John's portfolio during good years generated $102,000. After taxes, they generated for the first year $71,000 of net after taxes. This is nothing. It basically just keeps on saying what was the final result at the end of the year. It's 33.6. This is showing you what the total excess income after paying all your expenses was. So Mary and John basically had $52,000 of money left over after paying their portfolio, paid their bills. They said that basically you needed to pay a minimum of $30,000 of it towards maintaining a stable portfolio and to address inflation. You paid $42,000. You took out $10,507. This $10,507 is withdrawn from the portfolio and it's put into your bank account, which we refer to as the cash reserve. So this is what you would use to go on that Mexican trip or to go and pay for your hot water tanks, your other extraordinary things. This is what's replenishing your bank account when your bank account is basically drawn more than the average expenses. And it does it for year 2 and it does it for year 3. And then, of course, whatever we just saw on the good year, we see now this is what's happened to Mary and John if they were in 3 years of a 25% bear market. So they started at 400,000, but if the bear market stayed going on there, based on the reinvestment and all the models are still following, it's saying here, this is a neat thing. You got to understand, when you're in a bear market, there's going to be the times when your account is basically being stressed out. Your portfolio is being stressed out. So it's saying you should be paying $2,621. Oh, sorry, it says your minimum to reinvest is $2,400. You don't have that amount of money because you said 80% of what you got left is only $2,097. So in order to maintain that 80% reinvestment, you are actually not meeting your minimum reinvestment standards. So that means that your portfolio is going to slow down. It may not rise as much as it could have if you met your minimum standards. So that is what that means. So now you could address this by saying, okay, fine, all right, during those 3 years, let's just put it all back into the portfolio. So there it is. I moved it to 100%, saying nothing. I'm not taking anything out. You can see it's all gone. Now you can see that, okay, well, John and Mary, now that you're just reinvesting everything that wasn't paid for with expenses, you are doing good. You're at your minimum. Of course, with inflation and stuff happening and everything going up, you can see slowly but surely near the end of the 3rd year, you're actually going to start eroding down to the point where you're back in the red, meaning you're still not contributing down here. But that's after 3 years. Hopefully the bear market will go away in the 2nd year, and then you'll be back onto this side where you'll be generating a lot more money and you'll be back in good graces. But this is the bear market, so you know that you're going to be in bad scenario there. Okay. The 3rd chart we're going to use, and this is actually hard because this number is so small. So let me just make this number look bigger for us, just so we can change here. So format, I have it set to 80,000. So I'm going to set this number to only like 20,000, just so we can see it easier. Actually it needs to be more. I'm going to set it to 10,000. Okay, so what these numbers here show at a graphical level, it captures all this visually. So what this is this marker here is your bear market LEPB gap, and this one here is your good market gap. So what we're saying here is that you look at this here, this light blue dotted line is your $5,000 a month expenditure. The dark blue number line is the part that was paid for after the other income paid the bills. So we know that the portfolio only pays for what the other incomes didn't pay for. So we're going to use that as the bottom. We're going to then say that here is, during a bear market, here is what you'll be allowed to be able to pay, because you know that you're generating less yield and stuff like that. Okay, now we're going to go over here and use that this is for you in a good market, same bottom, but we're going to say up here. All right. So these are your 2 ratios, your LEPB ratio. So here's your expenditure. Here's how much you're in the worst case scenario for your bear market. This is showing you how much you're basically over your expenditures. And remember, we said it was okay, but it wasn't great. You were at 2.5, 2.4. So you're basically in the red because you wanted a target of 3. Well, this purple black dotted line here, this is saying what the target LEPB ratio is that you set, which was 3.0. During bear markets, you're under it. But the good news is the important number, which is during good years, your LEPB ratio is supposed to be over 3, which is here. You're currently running over that number. Don't look at the things here. You're seeing that you're basically over your number for that, and you're doing good. So right now, Mary and John's portfolio can meet all their needs with the current percentages they have. They might want to improve it a little bit, but generally speaking, this is showing that for Mary and John, their portfolio is doing pretty good. Okay, now let's just do a couple changes. let's turn around and say that Mary decided she doesn't want to work part-time anymore, and she's now quit her job. There, she quit her job. Now there's not, that money is not coming in anymore. Well, now let's look, just by her saying she's not working anymore, we're now not generating as much non-investment income. So now let's look at the numbers. Now you can see what's changed here. I'm just going to go here because the graph is the easiest thing. This is where they were, but look what's changed. This number here, which is your amount paid by the portfolio, by your non-investment income, has now gone up because it didn't pay as much of it. So now the portfolio is responsible to pay for more of it. So now we've got some troubles. Because Mary quit her job, we now basically have a very low LEPB ratio. And we're saying that we're getting pretty close. Matter of fact, after the third year, hate dragging this thing. After the third year, we're getting really tight. So this is getting a little bit on the dangerous side. Matter of fact, this is not good at all because here you're turning around. You said you wanted an LEPB of 3. Well, you're not even reaching 3. An LEPB of 3 is way up here. You're down here. So you're basically saying that, look at right here, you're at 2.1. So you're at 2.1. So just by Mary quitting her job, your portfolio that was actually doing good is now actually under stress. It still could pay its bills, but your LEPB ratio, sleeping at night, is not going to be as easy because your portfolio is just barely paying your bills. If you have anything too extraordinary, this guy may or may not be able to cover it. So I wouldn't say it's horrible, but it's actually pretty risky. So this is not good. Now, this is why this is called a modeling tool. Hang on, let me get rid of this. So now Mary and John says, okay, well, geez, that's not good with Mary quitting her job. What can we do about it? Well, unless we borrow money to invest, which is something we can do, one thing we can do is we could maybe buy more juicers and boosters, and we could bring our portfolio yield up from 25% to say, let's say we'll move it up to 5 more percent. We'll move it up to 30%. Now, it did help. You could see down here, it did help. So we're still not at that level because of this, but we're saying that we are getting closer. But you really could see that, right now the scenario is if Mary quits her job, you're not at that comfortable level of saying that your LEPB buffer is at 3. You could turn around and say, well, let's cheat. Let's make it 2. Well, of course, if you made it 2, that meant that you're actually taking some risks because you were saying that you were comfortable with an LEPB buffer of 3. So I wouldn't want to change that if that was the number you thought was what let you sleep at night. That's the number that basically says you can sleep well at night because your portfolio is generating 3 times more than you need. Right now, you're not. Okay. You could turn around and say, okay, well, let's get really aggressive. Let's really pump in some juicers. Let's go to a 35% yield. Well, you can see that we are now with $400,000. We're getting close to the LEPB target. You can see right here, but it's still not there. The other thing you're going to see, and this is what I've noticed as a great trending tool, is that when the erosion starts getting higher and higher over the years, unless you do more reinvestment, this guy here is slowly sloping down on its monthly income because you're putting in more juicers that are eroding, and you're starting to see that number decline. During a bear market, you've increased it here, but you're also seeing it decline. So that's not good, right? So you might want to be very careful about that. So the other thing you can do, and this is why this modeling tool is really cool. Mary and John said, yeah, okay, we said $5,000, but you know what? We go to the restaurants a lot. We actually go out and buy a lot of things and things that so remember I mentioned in the video, I said between discretionary and mandatory expenditures. Well, let's say that Mary and John said of that 5,000, 1,000 of it is us going to the movies and restaurants and stuff. If we really are going to be tight, let's say we're going to go down to $4,000 and get rid of some of those expenditures. Well, now you can turn around and say, okay, well, now Mary and John, you're doing okay. And now instead of 35%, let's turn around and say we're going back down to a little bit more reasonable 30%. You can see by using the modeling tool how you can start actually trying different scenarios. And you say, okay, we're now back to where we are. If we want to save, stop spending as much money, and we want to increase our yield slightly, we could turn around and say, okay, well, there you go. There's your target LEPB ratio. You're now above it. Everything's looking good again. Okay? So this is what's cool about this. Again, I could keep going on here, but I know you guys are getting what I'm doing. I wanted to show a full scenario of how a modeling tool works and how you could play around with different numbers and say, well, how about if the markets only went, the bear markets are only 20%? Well, that won't affect your target yield. It will affect this because it means this number will actually rise because the market was not as bearish as we anticipated. So that you can see that happen. So this is what's so cool. Now, I wanted to point out something else before I show you my own example. People talk about, oh, well, if you're a growth portfolio, first of all, a growth portfolio cannot do this because a growth portfolio does not generate reoccurring monthly income that it could actually reinvest back in and start compounding income. What's so absolutely critically valuable about a passive income portfolio that can do something like this LEPB modeling is the fact that we are actually reinvesting money back into our portfolio while we're actually consuming it. Unlike a growth portfolio that cannot do this, a growth portfolio has to melt down. It has to sell its assets. So you can't use a tool like this or a strategy like this, like the LEPB buffering and strategy with a growth portfolio, because they don't generate income. They literally are eroding their NAV every month as they sell more assets. And the only strategy they're left with is this thing called a cash wedge, where they basically pile up some cash reserves like we have over here for our emergency spending, but that is their only protection against bear markets. They basically build up a bank account of money that literally won't be used for anything unless there's a bear market. Then they basically use it and consume it while they're in a bear market so that they aren't selling off their assets at low prices. And then hopefully when the markets come back, they can replenish their cash wedge. Well, the biggest problem with that strategy, and people say it all the time, the cash wedge is basically, let's say it's 4 times your salary, whatever, or 1 year's worth of bad markets. They basically are sitting on tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars doing absolutely nothing. Whereas in a model like this, during the peak markets, the money that is now not needed is being reinvested. So this is actively reusing and compounding your income when your portfolio is in a good market. And the only time the LEPB has to be there for protection is during bear markets. And so you're basically, the buffering is like, I can use the buffer to reinvest when the markets are good, and I could basically use less of it when the markets are bad, but I'm always able during a bear market to survive. That is the biggest benefit of this LEPB model, or this 3-time expenditure model, over the growth portfolio's only strategy, which is a cash wedge. Okay, now I'm going to do one more thing, and I'm going to actually show you so this was sort of an arbitrary scenario. Everyone can sort of say, I see how that works. I'm going to quickly go through what my numbers are. So basically for me, I basically use a $10,000 a month number here. I basically run around 2 times. So basically I try to have a cash balance of about 2 times. Sometimes it's even 1.5. So I'll just say it's 1.5. So that's the thing here. I currently use three times my buffer, but I don't really need to, honestly, because my portfolio size is as large as it is. 3 times is more than I need, but I just wanted to be safe. So I currently use a 3 times. This is what I referred to before as the 3x expenditures. I still use that 3x buffer. I basically put in about 65%, 70% of my entire portfolio into it, because I basically, what I don't use for paying bills, I basically reinvest. But let's turn around and say that 90% of everything that's left over, I basically put back into my account. I put back into reinvesting. I use 3.7 as inflation. And for my case, I do have no company pension. I do care. I've already collecting my CPP, which I'll say is around $900. I do have this little dividend thing I get as royalties, so I'm going to say 900 there. And I'm going to leave the indexing at, say 2%. And my average tax for that, I'm going to do, because this one's fully taxed on it, I'm going to say it's 30%. Actually, it's 23% I'm going to use here. Okay, so for here, I use my current book NAV. So my current book NAV is just around 1.9 million. So there it is right there. Whoop, that's 190. So there's 1.9. There's my book value. I currently, during peak markets, run around 37%. So it's saying that my NAV erosion is around 12.8%. It's saying basically that 20,000 should be reinvested back in order to keep my NAV stable. It's saying that, Perry, based on inflation, you should also be adding 5,800. So it's saying at minimum, I should be reinvesting $26,000 of my monthly generated income back into the portfolio. We're going to use that 25% bear market again, saying the S&P dropped by 25%. It's saying, Perry, based on this, when markets are good, you're at 37%, but when markets are bad, expect a yield, Perry, of 23%. Big hit. So you can see my portfolio, basically monthly generation of income drops dramatically. I know because all of my portfolio passive income is in TFSAs and RIFs. The only money that comes out of my portfolio is the money to pay my expenditures, which means I'm sheltering all my generated income. It all goes back into reinvestment. And so I basically did my calculations, and based on that, it comes out to about 8.2% based on this number, saying 8.2% is what would be taxed. That's the money coming out. Now, for me, it's basically on an average tax rate for me of around 27%, and my wife around 18%. But anyways, we run around 23% average tax, but this is what it would be for this model. So what it says, Perry, is based on what we're talking about is you should have 64,000 if you had a 37% number. Right now, my yield is around 33%, but if it was at peak, it would be 37%, 64,000. After taxes, 59,000. After I pay my minimum reinvestment, it would be 33,000. Now, here's the big difference. Because I'm a very aggressive portfolio running at 37%, during bear markets, I'm only generating not 64,000 before taxes, but only 34,000 before taxes. After taxes, only 31,000, and after reinvestment, only have $5,692 left after I do all my reinvestment. And remember, my reinvestment was 90% of everything that's left over after paying my bills. So it now turns around and says, okay, Perry, you said 10,000. Your CPP basically pays 1,386 of it. So your portfolio needs to pay out at least $8,614 a month to pay all your retirement living expenses. It also turns around and says a whole bunch of other things here. So it says that, Perry, your LEPB ratio for your portfolio at a ratio of 3 is 25,000. You're generating right now during good marks 59,000. You're $33,000 over your LEPB number. In good markets, your LEPB ratio is at 6.25. I only wanted 3, so I'm doing really good. During bad markets, I'm actually below my 3%. So because I'm so aggressive, I'm actually below my number at 2.93. But again, I remember I said the whole idea of the LEPB is to deal with you when you are in your bear market. So this is just a number. I'm not that worried about it, that it's at 2.8 or 2.9. That's because I'm already at the bottom. And so I wouldn't be doing a bottom on a bottom. So I'm okay with that number being 2.93. It's saying my withdrawals with my expenditures and my cash reserve withdrawals is about $153,000 a year that comes out of my portfolio. My portfolio generates before taxes $594. And that's basically an average between my 3 good years and my 3 bad years. And it says based on that average, you're generating around $594, which is about right. And my taxes right now are $48,000. I know it's like $51,000, so I could actually make this number here. Remember I said it was 8.2. I could make that maybe like 8.4. Actually, I can make it a little bit more. Let's say, because I know I pay about 51, I'm going to say I'm going to get 9%. All right, there we go. So let's leave it at 9%. So that means basically there's about what my taxes are. So here's some of the other numbers. It says that I have 23,000 during good markets. I have 3,000 left during bad markets. Generally, here's the big number people want to know. Perry, how much do you reinvest back into your portfolio? Based on this model, 65% of my entire monthly generated income is reinvested. And that is pretty much the right number. I do reinvest about 65% of my portfolio back into my portfolio. Okay, so I'm going to show you now the chart here. Because the numbers are so big, I got to change it again. I'm going to move it up to 60,000. All right. Whoop, I need to go a little higher. Let me go here, 70,000. All right, so here's my number. So here's the numbers during my bear market. Okay, during a bear market, I'm basically, you can see right there, that dark blue number is what I have to pay, portfolio has to pay. During a bear market, I'm right here. And during my good market, which I can actually grab this. I hate doing a graphic over here. So if I do a bear market, I'm over here. And you can see that my buffer is very large. You see that I want 3 and I'm at 6.2. So I'm basically not worried. You can see that if the bear market kept on happening, my bear market LEPB buffer will start going below my target. My target LEPB is this line here. But I'm not worried about that one. I'm worried about this one. And this one is way above that number. So when somebody asks me, how do you sleep at night when the markets are going to really go bad and crash? This is why. Because I am doing good. Even like, actually look at here, my LEPB, even in my bear markets, was positive until 3 years of 25% down cycle of the S&P. So this is where I'm working on this. All right. And the last thing I want to talk about this one before going off to conclusions is here's where I could turn around and do some experimenting. I could do, and I'm actually thinking of starting to do this. I've reached sort of a pinnacle of how much I want to generate. Over the next 2 years, I'd like to go down to a target of about 25%. I know it's going to reduce my monthly income, but it also is going to reduce my my volatility. So you can see here, and it says, okay, well, if you're going down to 25%, you're still doing good. You're still at 5.1. Matter of fact, you're actually even doing good on your bear market LEPB because things are not as volatile anymore. So you can now see, like, look how much money I'm not making anymore. But I'm able to pay my bills. Even though I'm not making as much, I can now pay my bills and have a less volatile portfolio. Matter of fact, during the bear market, it's almost identical to the target weight. So this is what's really cool. And I think that's about it. I could talk about this forever, but I think I've talked enough. So I'm going to now go back to the conclusions and we'll finish this off. And remember what I'm going to tell you, this is going to be available for the PIIverse Pillar members. So, all right, so let's go back to the conclusions. In conclusion, I introduced to you the concept I have named the LEPB, the Living Expense Protection Buffer. I explained how this is exclusive to passive income investors since the model requires the portfolio to generate monthly income, something a growth portfolio cannot do. I explained what living expenses are and how they are critically important for the LEPB model. I explained all the sources of cash inflows, both the non-investment and the investment income. I explained how I created this LEPB modeling spreadsheet using all the elements and metrics to all investors to perform countless what-if scenarios if they had the spreadsheet, and that this spreadsheet will be available to all my Pillar members. Remember, as a Pillar member, which is the highest level membership, you have access to my Google Drive, and in my Google Drive, you will be able to download this spreadsheet as well as the other spreadsheets that I have in there, as well as the PDFs of this video, PowerPoint video, and all the other PowerPoint videos that I did. Their PDFs are in that Google Drive. So if you are interested in this spreadsheet, you can become a Pillar member and you can download this. This video has taken me over a week to create the spreadsheet and the video content. If you found this video valuable, please press the like button and please subscribe if you found this content very valuable, because this is the kind of stuff I do. And again, if you're interested in downloading this spreadsheet, please, become a Pillar member. And until next time, stay safe, stay investing, and I will see you in the PIIverse.